Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
You know,
This time we're diving into the career of Kamala Harris.
it's always fascinating when someone has, such a meteoric rise.
It really is, and especially with somebody like Kamala Harris who just ran for president.
Right.
I mean, everybody's got an opinion.
Exactly. And it
Right.
feels like in her case,
Yeah.
we've seen her in so many different roles in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
District attorney general, Senator, vice president. Like,
Right.
it's just been boom, boom, boom.
So to really get into it, I think it makes sense to start with the beginning.
Yeah, let's go way back.
Let's go to Wikipedia.
All right.
Let's look at her bio and kind of see what we can glean from that.
Okay.
So, pretty standard stuff. Born in Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
Parents were immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
Her dad from Jamaica, her mom from India.
Interesting mix.
Yeah. And then she went to Howard University, which is
you.
a historically black university.
Yeah.
And then on to UC Hastings for law school.
So, looking at those early choices, is there anything that jumps out at you about that trajectory?
I mean, already you can kind of see like
Yeah.
a focus on maybe some social justice issues there.
Potentially, like going to Howard, choosing to focus on crimes against women and children as a prosecutor, that's
It's not
at the typical
typical path to political power.
Exactly.
Yeah, and even when she was a prosecutor, she was focused on more than just getting convictions.
Oh, really?
She was looking at higher conviction rates, but she was also pushing for like support systems for survivors of crime.
Interesting.
So it's like even then, was that genuine empathy or was she thinking about optics?
Yeah. Was she thinking about how this is going to play out
Yeah,
in the
right.
long term?
Building that narrative.
Right. Creating that image of herself as a champion
Champion for the vulnerable.
early on.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
So, I mean, that's kind of the central question here.
Yeah.
Is this genuine commitment to these causes or is it just calculated ambition?
It's the age-old question, right?
Right. And it gets even trickier when you start to look at some of the controversies from her time as a prosecutor.
Okay, so what are we talking about here?
So there's a lot of talk about her being, quote unquote, tough on crime. And people point to her defense of California's death penalty back in 2014.
Right.
But then you have articles like this one from The Nation that are arguing that those criticisms are totally unfair.
Okay.
They say that she was working within a flawed system and that she later pushed for significant reforms.
It's almost like you have these two completely different narratives of Kamala Harris
Right.
competing with each other.
Yeah.
One is this kind of hard-nosed
Yeah.
prosecutor, maybe even contributing to mass incarceration.
Right.
The other is someone who championed the Violence Against Women Act,
Right.
which is a pretty big deal.
It is.
So how do you reconcile those two?
I mean, it's tough. And then there's even the allegations against her husband, Doug Emhoff.
Ooh, okay, what happened there?
There's this article from NewsZone that points out the irony of her working on the Violence Against Women Act and then having these accusations against Emhoff
Right.
of domestic violence back in 2012.
So what are the allegations?
I mean, he denies it,
Of course.
but it adds another layer of complexity.
It does make you think about how much we should be holding our public figures accountable for
Yeah.
the actions of their spouses, right?
Right, that fair?
Especially when those actions seem to contradict their stated values and their work.
Yeah. So to our listener, I mean, what's your take on this early part of her career?
Yeah. What do you think?
Does it suggest a genuine desire to serve? Or is there something else going on?
A little whiff of ambition, maybe?
A little too much ambition.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind as we move on. So
Okay.
we're going to get into her key policy positions.
All right.
And I think that's where things get
Roll.
really juicy. Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to some of her key stances on like the major issues.
Yeah. So, I mean, she's generally known for being pretty progressive.
Across the board. Yeah.
Abortion rights, LGBTQ plus rights, gun control, climate action.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's been pretty vocal about all those things.
Yeah. And I mean, she's not just talking about it. Like,
Right.
remember the Climate Equity Act that she was trying to push through the Senate?
Oh, yeah?
Like, that was a
That's a big one.
pretty concrete action, like trying to create an office dedicated to helping those communities that are
That were hit hardest.
most affected by climate change.
Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
it wasn't just all talk.
No.
She was actually trying to do stuff.
Right. And she's also been pretty consistent on things like cannabis legalization, strengthening voting rights, expanding the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, and those are all pretty much in line with like the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party.
For sure.
But then you get to her approach to economic issues.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like it gets a little more complicated.
Okay. How so?
Especially during her 2024 run. She was trying to strike a more populist tone with some of her proposals.
Like what kinds of things?
Things like controlling food prices, capping drug costs, expanding the child tax credit.
It's like directly trying to appeal to working class families.
Exactly.
Who are feeling the squeeze.
And, you have to think about that in the context of her loss to Trump.
Yeah.
This Nation article we have argues that the Democrats lost because they failed to really address those working class economic anxieties.
Interesting. So it wasn't necessarily the progressive policies themselves, but the perception that maybe they weren't actually improving people's lives.
Right. Were those populist economic proposals from her a genuine attempt to connect with those voters? Or was it a calculated move to try to broaden her appeal?
Yeah, you never really know.
It's tough to say.
It's hard to know what's going on in people's heads.
Right. But it does make you wonder if maybe she's more of a pragmatist than a true ideologue.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then there's her foreign policy positions.
Okay, what's her stance there?
I mean, she's pretty much aligned with Biden on a lot of stuff, continued aid to Ukraine and Israel. But she has been more critical of Israel's actions in the conflict with Hamas.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she's even called for a ceasefire and pushed for a two-state solution.
So that's a little bit of a departure from
the
typical, pro-Israel stance.
It's a tough, she's trying to balance.
It's a tightrope walk.
Yeah, she's trying to maintain that support from pro-Israel voters, but also acknowledging the complexities of that conflict.
It's a really complicated situation.
It is. And then on immigration, she supports increased border security, but also wants to reform the system.
So again, kind of threading the needle.
Trying to find that middle ground.
Between those two seemingly opposing viewpoints.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
So it feels like with her, there's always this tension between appearing tough, but also advocating for a more humane approach.
Yeah, I see that.
So where does that leave us with this grifter-gifted question?
Right back to the big question.
Is she a progressive champion fighting for what she believes in? Or is she more of a political chameleon adapting her position to fix the situation?
Expedient.
Yeah. I mean, before we make any judgments, though, I think we need to consider one more piece of this.
Okay, what's that?
The power of image and narrative.
Because let's be real, image matters.
It does, especially in politics.
Especially in politics.
And with Kamala Harris, there's a lot there.
Like what?
Or like this New York Post article we have. It reveals that her campaign spent $2.5 million on a town hall.
Wow.
That was produced by Oprah Winfrey's company.
So they went all out.
Yeah. It makes you wonder what kind of message they were trying to send.
Right. Was it about star power?
Yeah.
Was it about trying to reach a wider audience?
Was it about distracting from any weaknesses in her policies?
Right. Were they trying to cover something up?
We don't know.
We don't know.
But it's interesting.
It's a lot of money.
And then there's the whole Ella Emhoff factor.
Oh, yeah. Her stepdaughter.
Her stepdaughter, who's a fashion model, known for her kind of unconventional style and her outspoken activism.
So they're trying to create this image of a modern, relatable family appealing to younger voters.
Exactly. And, this Lawyer Monthly article we have describes Ella as a disruptor in the fashion world. So does that apply to Kamala Harris herself?
Is she disrupting the political landscape, or is she just playing the game better than anyone else?
So I think it's important for our listeners to really think about this.
Yeah.
How much does image influence your perception of a political figure?
Right. Are you more likely to support someone who seems relatable and stylish?
Even if their policies don't quite align with your own?
It's something we all have to grapple with.
Yeah.
Especially in this day and age.
Right.
Social media, carefully crafted personas.
Yeah. Are we voting for the person, the policies?
Or the image?
Or the image they project?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we have.
But something keeps coming back to me.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Those allegations against Doug Emhoff.
Kamala's husband.
Yeah, I feel like we kind of touched on it earlier.
We did.
But I think it's worth digging a little deeper.
I understand why it would stick with you.
Yeah.
Especially given Kamala's career and focus on,
crimes against women.
Protecting women and girls.
Exactly. So this Sun article, it alleges that back in 2012, Emhoff got into a physical altercation with an ex-girlfriend.
Oh, wow.
After a party at Cannes.
At Cannes?
Yeah, apparently they were shouting.
Okay.
And she accused him of slapping her.
Hmm.
Now, it's important to point out that Emhoff denies this completely.
Of course.
There were no charges filed, no legal action taken.
Right, so we're in he said, she said territory?
Totally. But the article does quote a friend of the woman who claims that they saw her afterwards really upset, saying that Emhoff had hit her after she touched his shoulder.
So it's murky.
It's super murky.
Yeah, and without more evidence, we can't really know what happened.
But it does raise these questions.
It does, especially given Kamala's work and her own words about the Violence Against Women Act.
She's talked about how her whole career has been about, fighting for the safety and well-being of women and girls.
And even highlighting her experience as a prosecutor.
Exactly.
Specializing in these types of cases.
So how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, that's the big question.
With these allegations against her husband.
Right.
It creates this real dissonance.
It does, and it's something that I'm sure voters thought about.
Of course.
Especially during her presidential run.
Right. How much are we holding public figures accountable?
Yeah.
For the actions of their spouses?
Even if those actions allegedly occurred before they were together.
It's tough. There's no easy answer.
No, there isn't.
We all have to make our own judgments, I guess.
Exactly, and I think that's what this whole deep dive has been about.
Right.
Giving you the tools to make those judgments.
We've looked at Kamala Harris from all these different sides. Her background, her policies.
The way she presents herself.
How she's presented in the media.
Yeah.
And then these allegations that are hard to
unpack.
Hard to really make sense of.
So where does that leave us on our spectrum?
Right. Grifter or gifted?
The big question.
I mean, honestly, it's still up for debate.
Yeah.
There's evidence pointing in both directions.
I think that's true for a lot of these figures we look at.
Yeah. She's achieved some incredible things.
Yeah.
Broken barriers.
Championed some important causes.
But then there are these shadows.
Yeah, these contradictions.
That make you wonder.
About her true motivations.
Yeah. So is she a visionary leader driven by this deep desire to serve? Or is she a master strategist just carefully crafting her image and leveraging every opportunity for personal gain?
Or maybe it's both.
Maybe it's both.
Maybe it's more complicated than that.
And I think that's the point.
Right.
We're not here to give you the answer.
We're just giving you...
We're giving you the information.
A context.
The different viewpoints.
So you can decide for yourself.
Exactly. Because in a world where charisma and controversy are so intertwined, it's more important than ever to be informed.
To think critically.
To question our assumptions.
So to our listener, what's your verdict on Kamala Harris?
Grifter or gifted?
You decide and keep that question in mind as you encounter other polarizing figures.
Because the more we question, the more we learn.
And the better equipped we are to navigate this crazy world.
This complex world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.